America is trapped in the loop of 1968. The politics of that fateful year have set the patterns of our national life ever since. During the George Floyd riots of 2020, the politics of 1968 reemerged with a vengeance. The Black Panther Party reappeared as the Black Lives Matter movement. The ideology of the Weather Underground became the ideology of our prestige institutions. And the old Marxist-Leninist guerrillas traded in their bandoliers and became diversity and inclusion managers in the Fortune 100. The cultural revolution that began a half-century ago is now reflected in a deadening sequence of acronyms: CRT, DEI, ESG, that have increasingly become our new official morality. Many conservatives have made an uneasy peace with this transvaluation of values, even as the culture around them in many places has collapsed. But this attitude will no longer suffice. It's time to break the loop of 1968. It's time for counter-revolution. And there's one man, reviled in his time, who can serve as our guide. The 37th President of the United States, Richard Milhous Nixon. The year 1968 was a cataclysm. Rioting, looting, arson, murder. The New Left's coalition of the white intelligentsia and the black underclass had taken to the streets, promising to overthrow the government and establish a Marxist-Leninist state. In his presidential nomination speech that year, Richard Nixon set the stakes and appealed to the revolution of 1776 as the antidote to the chaos of 1968.
My friends, we live in an age of revolution in America and in the world, and to find the answers to our problems, let us turn to a revolution that will never grow old. The world's greatest continuing revolution, the American Revolution.
Nixon called on the silent majority, the forgotten Americans, the non-shouters, the non-demonstrators, to rally behind his counter-revolution. And he promised to be their champion, against the bureaucracy, against the chaos, against the corruption. Over the next 4 years, this coalition would grow, from a narrow victory in 1968 to a 49-state landslide in 1972, the greatest political triumph of the post-war era. Nixon had mobilized the middle class into a political force, and he had a vision for reversing an era of decline much like our own. The first element of Nixon's counter-revolution was the campaign to reestablish law and order. As a candidate, Nixon pledged strength against the forces of crime and violence. His campaign advertisements played to the anxieties of the age.
It is time for an honest look at the problem of order in the United States. Dissent is a necessary ingredient of change. But in a system of government that provides for peaceful change, there is no cause that justifies resort to violence.
As president, Nixon delivered. He instructed his FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, to launch a sophisticated campaign to infiltrate, disrupt, and dismantle the radical organizations that threatened violent revolution against the state, including the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army, the Weather Underground, and the Communist Party USA. Although some of Hoover's actions went beyond the rule of law, by the end of Nixon's first term, the administration had successfully dismantled most of the subversive organizations, and many of their leaders were on the run, in prison, or in the ground. As the neo-Marxist philosopher Herbert Marcuse wrote in 1972, the Nixon administration has strengthened the counter-revolutionary organization of society in all directions. The Black Panther Party has been systematically chased down before it disintegrated in internal conflicts. A vast army of undercover agents is spread over the entire country and through all branches of society. The revolution, it seemed, was finished. For Nixon, however, law and order was only the beginning. By the end of his first term, frustrated by the permanent administration in Washington, Nixon had conceived of his most important task, leading a counter-revolution against the state bureaucracy.
The idea that a bureaucratic elite in Washington knows best what is best for people everywhere and that you cannot trust local governments is really a contention that you cannot trust people to govern themselves. This notion is completely foreign to the American experience.
To combat this, Nixon proposed a new American Revolution, in which the government would be put back into check and power would be returned to the people. As the New York Times noted, Nixon wanted to advance an ideological grand design that would reverse the progression of the New Deal and the Great Society, abolishing the federal programs that threatened to impose the elite consensus on the common citizen. His famous enemies list was a crude proxy for the type of men who wanted to use the power of the state to re-engineer society in their image. As Nixon told Henry Kissinger in the Oval Office,
"The press is the enemy. The establishment is the enemy. The professors are the enemy. Write that in the blackboard 100 times and never forget it."
And in a certain sense, Nixon was right. He realized that in order to have a chance at restoring the principle of self-government, conservatives needed to overthrow the establishment and tame the bureaucracy that desired to manage society from above. And he had formulated a plan for achieving this, his new American Revolution, breaking up the federal bureaucracy, defunding left-wing ideological programs, and sending taxpayer dollars and decision-making power back to the states. As Nixon wrote in his diary just after his re-election, "This is going to be quite a shock to the establishment, but it is the only way, and probably the last time, that we can get government under control before it gets so big that it submerges the individual completely and destroys the dynamism which makes the American system what it is." Tragically, Nixon never achieved his counter-revolution. His political career, which began in the California desert and ended in the White House, was cut short by the Watergate scandal and his subsequent resignation.
I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
These are the images of Richard Nixon seared into the minds of many Americans. His lonely resignation speech, his last meal in the White House, his final departure on the presidential helicopter. But over the years, another story has emerged that challenges the conventional wisdom. Nixon was not the sole author of his fate, but the victim of a bureaucratic coup. Harper's editor Jim Hogan, former Nixon aide Jeff Shepard, and other researchers have uncovered tens of thousands of declassified documents that reveal the black hand of the state as a prime mover in Nixon's demise. As Claremont scholar John Marini has long argued, the Watergate scandal was, at the deepest level, a war between the democratically elected president and the permanent state. By the time of Nixon's re-election in 1972, he posed the greatest danger to the authority of the bureaucracy and the administrative state, Marini writes, and consequently, he had to be cut down. Nixon had tried to drain the swamp, but the swamp won. Although Nixon failed to realize his ambitions during his presidency, he still holds the key to understanding America's ongoing cultural revolution and how to defeat it. The first step is for conservatives to revive the silent majority that established the political basis for Nixon's counter-revolution. Conservatives have an opportunity to build a multiracial, middle-out coalition that promises to overthrow the captured institutions of the left and to return power to the common citizen. Second, after securing political victory, the next conservative administration must work to radically reshape the federal bureaucracy, defund left-wing ideological programs, abolish DEI departments, and build a patronage system capable of cultivating a new establishment. Finally, the next conservative administration must mobilize federal law enforcement against the left-wing radical organizations that engaged in political violence during the summer of George Floyd. What Nixon did to the Black Panther Party, the next president must do to the violent factions of our time. Nixon's call for a new American revolution is more urgent than ever. If conservatives want to protect the American way of life, they must be willing to lay siege to the institutions and reorient them according to their own values. Whatever the odds, it's never too late for counter-revolution in our time.